How's everyone doing? All right, thanks for having me. Thanks, Chris and Finn and everyone else. My name is Scott Pollack. I am currently at American Express. I've been there for about 6.5 years. I was at Dow Chemical before that. I got the 10 years of giant company experience in my belt. But Chris didn't mention, has also been in most of your shoes before. I've been in the startup world going back even longer, dating back to the first round of the dot-com boom in New York in the 90s, and then running both as founder as well as employee back over the past 13 years or so. So I know what it's like from both sides, and that's really what I want to talk about today. I'll talk about David and Goliath, a love story, all right? How startups can partner with big companies. So just a quick show of hands. How many of you know the story of David and Goliath? Right, most people, right? Everyone knows the classic version of that story. David, the scrappy young upstart, is locked in battle with Goliath, right? The stodgy old behemoth. It's a story of adversaries, right? And I think we often replay that story a lot in the startup community as well. The startup David, the scrappy young startup, is also locked in battle trying to take down the giant Goliaths, the giant companies, those stodgy old ones, and standing in the way, slingshotting that rock of hustle right in their eyes. So I think it's a motivational tale for sure, but at the same time, I don't necessarily think it's the most productive way to think about these kinds of relationships between startups and large companies. Right? Instead, I think we can think about it and recast that story as a love story. And so that's what I want to talk about today, because love stories have happy endings. Love stories, everyone lives happily ever after. So that's what we're going to talk about today. How do you create that love story for your startup and your large company, and what's the path to making those types of partnerships that really do last? So that's what we're going to focus on, but before that, I want to talk for a moment about what's the opposite of that. What creates these partnerships that don't really pan out over the long term? Something that I call a vanity partnership. So a vanity partnership is like the celebrity marriage of the business development world. It's like the idea that seems really great at first, but once that fog of press and buzz and whatnot rolls away, then all of a sudden you're like, holy crap, what the hell am I doing? That wasn't really a good use of my time and energy after all. It happens all the time in partnerships as well, where, especially in a startup, 50 users down, just got our MVP launched, let me go figure out how I can go and partner with every Goliath out there. So it's a very kind of natural urge. But I think that's a dangerous way of thinking about it, because that creates these vanity partnerships, right? A vanity partnership is when you spend more time focusing on getting deals done than actually building your business. When you spend more time trying to just get partnerships launched and in market than the partnership actually spends in the market. Or when the press release is actually longer than the underlying agreement that fuels what that press release is all about, the agreement with the partnership. Right? Those are the telltale signs of a vanity partnership, and it's a dangerous waste of time, right? Results in just wasted resources, burnt bridges, just a loss of focus that we all know leads inevitably to startup death. So we want to avoid those, right? But why does that happen? And by the way, this is not just partnerships that eventually get off the ground that have that same fate. It's also the partnerships that are effectively on the path to being that, but don't actually even get there. It's the waste of time of trying to constantly, navigate every cubicle you can find in a large company to think about who can I be partnering with, as opposed to focusing on what really matters. It's an appealing way to think about partnerships in a startup, because what exactly is a successful partnership made of? It's a successful partnership, I say, it requires that all sides involved feel that their contribution to making that happen is sufficiently rewarded by the value that they receive, right? Very, very clear that both sides need to get something out of it. Both sides need to have a good answer to what's in it for me. And from a startup perspective, they're thinking about, entering a new market or reaching new customers or trying to build your brand. The path of having limited resources and therefore partnering with another company equals profit. It's a very appealing one, and so therefore it's very clear what the value is to the startup. But what's less clear is the perspective from the other side, from the giant company. Right? Big companies have plenty of options to create growth. So when they're thinking about building a new product or entering into a new market or reaching new customers, they have a very different perspective. They've got the resources that allow them to pursue a whole different series of options. They can build, they can buy, they can partner. They have different paths within each of those directions. And that requires something really important to think about. They have options, and so in order to partner with a large company, you must provide more value than every other option. You need to create that path so that it's very clear and obvious why you and your company is the path that creates the value that makes it the most sense for that other company. So I think let me just restate that one more time because I think it's important, that partnership is only one potential avenue, and that's another important thing. When we think about business development, we often think that equals partnerships, but really that's only one potential avenue for achieving growth. And so in order to partner with a large company, you must provide more value than every opportunity. So how do we do that? Right? I like to think about a three-phased process for thinking about business development and doing partnerships, frankly with companies of any size, but especially applicable with large companies. But here's the thing, I think we in startups we often jump immediately to the second phase of that process, what I call the communicating the value phase. This is where you're figuring out who should we work with and how do we navigate through that company and have all the meetings and all the sexy parts of doing partnerships, the deals, right? That's what we all want to jump immediately into, and we often do. But that overlooks the first phase that has to come before it if you're going to create anything other than a vanity partnership. And that phase is actually having something of value. And also considering what's going to be the most important use of your time and resources so that you're not spinning your wheels. Right? That first phase is about figuring out what value can I create for my company as well as what value do I have to offer to someone else. And only once you've fully understood that and really done the true due diligence to think about that honestly for your company, can you then move on to figuring out who is it that would care? And then who in the organization do you need to reach? And only once you've gone through that phase can you actually get to the place where we all want to be, which is delivering the value, actually bringing that idea to market and making sure that all the time that you spent getting that partnership in flight actually stays in the air instead of crashing and burning. So I think there's a few things you can take away from that idea. Like the having value phase is thinking about what's in it for you and what's in it for them. The communicating value phase is about who cares, who's going to care about the value that you can create for them. And then finally, the delivering value phase is really contemplating constantly, is this still creating the value that I need for me to continue contributing against this? Both sides should be constantly thinking about that. So let's just look for another couple moments at those phases and what they really require. So this first phase of having value is really about figuring out, again, what's in it for me and what's in it for them. And what value can I offer to someone else, and really what's the opportunity for me going after that? What's the value received on both sides of the equation? Now, here's a good thing, especially from a startup perspective, that a lot of us, when we think about this idea of value, what I can get out of an opportunity, out of a deal, what I can give out of a deal, we think about it as the most primal form of value, right? Economic value. Does this make me money? Does this make me revenue or profit? And here's the thing, you can create a partnership that creates a sufficient return on one's investment of time and energy in the form of making money for both sides, and both sides are satisfied by that, fantastic. You're off to a probably very successful partnership. But recognize that startups don't always have the ability or the audience or the other resources that it might take to create the sufficient amount of value that a large company might be thinking about, right? They might not get out of bed for less than $50 billion, and therefore they're not going to waste their time in going through all the bureaucratic hurdles that it will take to get that deal in market. What's important and valuable, at least, is to realize that value is a subjective concept, right? Everyone has a different way of thinking about what's in it for them, what's valuable to them. And from your perspective as well as from the startup, the large company standpoint. You can think about that from brand value. Is this something that will help give credibility or improve the impression of what my company's all about? Or option value. Doing this today doesn't necessarily make economic sense. Does it open up the doors to something else down the line? So doing it today is an opportunity to open up a door down the line. Or product value. Is there something that will enhance my product and therefore give my customers another reason to come calling me? Or you can think about that from both sides. So let's use one example. One you're going to hear about in a few moments is Foursquare and single platform. Right? Thinking about that idea, and I don't know the specifics of it, but I'd love to see if this still meshes with what really happened, and we'll hear in a few moments. Single platform, for all of those who I'm sure you are well aware, they work with restaurants to have menus available online. So they have an audience of a large number of restaurants of a certain size, food industry, small businesses, let's say with $1 million in revenue or so. That's not a really appealing audience for some people. They actually found that they have audience value, and perhaps that's something that they can offer to somebody else. And then they work with Foursquare, realizing the opportunity to get distribution for their content, and that creates more value for their merchants. Well, what Foursquare realizes that by taking those menus and putting them in Foursquare, well, they get the product value. They give their customers another reason to use Foursquare even more. Right? And there has to be value on both sides in order for that to make sense. We're going to hear about that from Wiley and Kenny and the guys in a few moments. So in the end, it's about what value does your company need? Is this the right thing for me to be doing right now, or is this something that's really just going to make me spin my wheels? And is that partnership the best way for you or the other company to be creating that value? Only once you figure that out can you figure out who are the companies where the value that I can offer to them actually might resonate. And you can then get to that next phase of figuring out how do we communicate that value to them? Who cares? Right? How does the value that I can offer to some other company, another partner, how does that resonate with them? How are they going to perceive that? And I think you got to think about that from two angles when you're trying to navigate those companies. First is from an organizational standpoint, what companies are going to care? Who needs what you have to offer? But then also within that company, where in that organization does the value that you have resonate? So with a single platform, is it the group that focuses on small businesses or small businesses of a certain size, or food companies, or perhaps something completely unrelated? Right? Where in the organization, in the structure, are the people that will not only be the decision makers, but interested in what you have to say because of the value you can offer to them specifically? And then the other side of the equation is the value you can create to the person you're talking to, the actual individual. Right? Thinking about the fact that navigating through a giant company often requires somebody to support you, to champion your idea, and you need to find those people with whom you can build that relationship personally over time so that they can help you figure out where that value resonates. And frankly, be motivated to help you get that deal through those bureaucratic hurdles that inevitably happen in every company. So thinking about it from the perspective of what we all do all the time in the startup world, we're constantly meeting people and networking. But how can you do that in the giant company world, right? There isn't as strong of a community, but nevertheless, the relationships you start forging now might have those dividends down the line because it helps you open up the idea of what's valuable. So once you've figured out what's the best path for you and what's the opportunity that you can create for somebody else, only then can you get to this final stage. And this is where we all want to wind up. Are we actually delivering something of value? Can we deliver on the promise? Did we create a partnership that actually means something? Or is it a vanity partnership? And what's important to consider is that all along the time that this deal, once it gets off the ground, it might spend 3 months, 6 months, 10 years getting off the ground. Was it worth it? That's a consideration that you need to be constantly considering to make sure that you're investing your continued resources in the right way. But also realize that the other side is also thinking the same thing. Am I going to keep putting people against this? Am I going to keep on spending time and energy to just keep this in my accounts payable system or whatever other ridiculous bureaucratic stuff that gets in the way? Is this deal giving us what we expected? Is it returning the value that we thought we'd get? Does it make it worth it? Does it return the value that we want? Have our priorities changed over time? Right? Does coming into the deal, perhaps our strategy suggested that yes, this makes perfect sense. And right now it makes perfect sense, but in 6 months or a year, does it still? Or are things changing? Are they going to go back to the drawing board and think about who else should we be partnering with that's more in line with what we offer today? Or maybe we do it ourselves. Maybe we go back to the drawing board and say, you know what, we partnered, we tested it, we're going to now build our path instead of buy or partner. And then finally, thinking about it from that perspective of marriage, right? A marriage requires constant work and effort to grow together as opposed to growing apart. And we all know the divorce rates in this country. I think they're even worse for startups and large companies, or frankly, partnerships of some companies of any size. So constantly thinking about this idea, are we delivering the value that we expected on both sides? Well, maybe to figure out, are we growing together? Are we growing apart? And avoid that treacherous path to becoming just another vanity partnership. So thanks very much, guys. I don't think I have to say.